Assalamu alaikum, I'm Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, and I'm Amanda. And this is Converts Unplugged. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversation.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam from the Shahada and beyond.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of Converts Unplugged. This month, we welcome Sister Henrietta, who is one half of the husband and wife team who runs Barefoot Institute. Sister Henrietta is going to be discussing the topic of marriage with us this month.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Henrietta. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. We are both really pleased that you could make it onto our podcast, and I'm sure you have many gems for us all, especially our listeners today, about marriage. Sister Henrietta, would you please introduce yourself and what you do?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor actually to be speaking, and I particularly love speaking to converts and about issues of conversion and marriage, which is something that I do on a regular basis. So I am by birth Hungarian. I became a Muslim now under 20 years ago. I have been traveling and writing, and at the moment what I'm enjoying the most is I am a writer, I'm a coach, and I also the co-founder of Barefoot Institute, which I run with my husband.
Alhamdulillah. Would you mind talking a little bit about your conversion story, please, and what brought you to Islam, if you want to? I'm sure you've been asked a million times, but it'd be lovely for our listeners to know.
It's always wonderful to talk about conversion. And you know, the funny thing is every time someone converts and we are part of the ceremony, it always brings me to tears. And my kids are laughing at this. Mommy, why do you laugh at this and cry at this? Because it's such an exciting thing that I remember the day when I became a Muslim myself. So what happened to me is you can imagine me working in the European Union, being a Buddhist in the evening, in the afternoon, going home and trying to eat vegetarian food, helping out with the local Buddhist community. During the day, I was working 14, 16 hours a day, traveling from one country to the next, totally burnt out before the age of probably 25. But what brought me to the understanding of what I need to do on my next birthday before I embark on the next year is that I actually had an accident when I was 22 years old. I fell on a rock and I was in a coma for 3 days. So we were out in the mountains and we were climbing. At night, I had to go to the bathroom and I slipped off the rock. And I fell on my skull, on my skeleton, on my head, which at that time, I didn't understand, whether it will have any significance in my life. But actually, I understood that was the moment when my soul woke up. Mm-hmm. And anything I have ever done after that was around finding my soul. And after I went to the hospital, my parents didn't know where I was. They just got a phone call. Your daughter is in coma. Please come. They come to the hospital. I look like a Buddhist monk. I have no hair, tubes sticking out of my head because they had to drain the fluid. And I heard the voice of the doctor who said, angels were not enough to save this girl. I don't believe in God, but this must be God, because she could have been disabled for the rest of her life. So I woke up, and since that day, I have been looking for God, I guess. So that was my story. And I spent a lot of time asking the doctor in the hospital about, what is it about you that doesn't allow you to believe in God? Because I felt that there was a God, but I was not brought up in that religious household. We had communism, we had no religion in our life. So it was a very strange search for me. So my mother actually said, look, I'm not really bothered about what religion you choose, but I don't understand is why do you have to believe in God? So for her, it was either way, I could have been whoever. But at that point, I didn't really know I wanted Islam to be my faith because I had no recollection. I had very bad memories and very bad propaganda about Islam in Hungary anyway. So I started to look into Eastern religions. I became a Buddhist, first a vegetarian and then a Buddhist. And somehow I ended up, not somehow, I guess, one of the events that we organized with the European Union, a NATO diplomat came to our event, and he was just a very strange man. He didn't want to drink. He didn't want any escorts, and that was part of our department's job, unfortunately. So, and when he left, he sent me a Quran. And I was really scared of reading it because I opened it and it was in English. I just couldn't read it. I couldn't listen to it, but I became very curious. So I went to my local mosque where I started learning Arabic. I did calligraphy. And I think by the time I was finishing my 25th year, I was ready because I knew that this is not the life I want, but I was leading a life that wouldn't allow me to have a family. I didn't have freedom of choice. I didn't have any sense of spirituality in my life at all. And I think I just came to that halt of I can't live like this anymore. So in the local mosque in Hungary at the time, we had about 3 or 4 mosques in Budapest, in the capital city, and we had lots of Arab students who managed to marry Hungarian women only to forget to tell them that this is going to be a temporary marriage. So the first thing the imam said to me, so where is the boyfriend? And I said, I have no boyfriend. I'm not interested in any of those things. But I took my Shahada, and within 2 months, alhamdulillah, I was out of my job. I resigned from my job, and I found myself in Egypt with 2 suitcases, and my life started then.
So when did you transition to the UK? What made you come over to the UK? And did you find that your faith strengthened here? And so how did you find the community here? Was it different to what you experienced in Hungary?
I spent a year in Egypt, almost a year. I was learning Arabic, and I just wanted to really experience culture. I met amazing people. I made friends with one of Cairo's richest women, who was a businesswoman, and we became like sisters to each other. So we talked a lot, and she was absolutely adamant that I must get married in Egypt, and I must settle down, and I must have a husband from Egypt because I would have a good life. And I just kept saying no, I'm not ready. I was 26 and I wasn't ready for marriage at that point. So when I had to make a decision of whether I go back to Hungary or I go anywhere else in the world, I made istikhara. And I remember the night when I was praying, I said to myself, I can go to England because I speak English, or I can go to Spain because I speak Spanish.
Wow.
I can go back to Hungary and not find a job or have any sort of life because I was already wearing the scarf, and I can't go back to the diplomatic services with the scarf. There was literally no Muslim woman around. Men, maybe, but it's very different for a woman. So I actually decided to come to London. And when I arrived, I kind of threw myself into every lecture, and I attended every public event, and I went to look for circles and look for community. And it was very, very difficult. I still think it is a difficult thing in London to build a real community. And what I mean by community is, when people are sick, when people need cooking, when people need support, when they need childcare, the real stuff. I'm talking about the reality of being a Muslim. It isn't just, go and see an event and listen to it and then go home and everything is going to back to normal. So that I was missing, and I still do in some shape or form, because I loved the way I lived in Egypt. That there was a group in my local area, the women, who literally their day and night was about serving other people, and I find so much inspiration in that. I know I could do so much better today with my life, I know, but that feeling, I don't think we can ever transfer it into London, because the city is just so big that it takes me a day to see a friend. I have to make an appointment. I hate that sense of I need to allocate time and it takes me half a day to drive over, or, it's that community feeling is still missing. But I guess it's big city life. So.
Yeah, it's very true what you're saying about London, even though there's so many opportunities for learning and so many mosques and things, but because of the sheer number of people, it does end up being very impersonal as well, which is too bad. Sister Henrietta, we've known each other for quite a long time now, mashallah. I'm friends with your sisters-in-law, and we know that you and your husband do quite a lot of amazing work in the community as well. Could you tell me a little bit about that? You yourself, as you said, you're a writer. Could you tell us more about what you've written and the projects that you work on with your husband, especially Barefoot Institute, which you mentioned earlier?
Yes, so thank you so much for this opportunity, because I have always been a writer, but I was very, very scared of actually properly writing and publishing. But about 6 years ago, we decided as a family that what we wanted to do is to take an opportunity, and I took the children to Spain, where we lived in the south of Spain for 2 years. And my kind of selfish need for that was because I was home educating my kids all the way until secondary school. So I was burnt out. I was really, really at the end of my tether. So I wanted to give up more peaceful, more community-centered life to my children. So I moved over to Spain, where I finished my first book, which is Heartsmart. And this book is a journey from my head to my heart. It's full of neuroscience. It's about looking at issues to do with service, with spirituality, and how our brain is only a tool. The heart is the center, and our soul is actually what commands our being. So I'm exploring that from a religious and scientific perspective. I'm not a scientist myself, but I studied neuroscience, so I find it fascinating. But about 12 years ago, my husband and me co-founded an institute called Barefoot Institute. And Barefoot Institute is all about Muslim relationships. It's helping to build confident Muslim families. It's helping people find the right partner, helping them to get through the process of marriage, helping them to navigate the relationship if they have been married for a long time, helping them and supporting them when they go through divorce, and providing post-divorce care for people who are finding it difficult to move on and get to the next stage. And we have got a couple of books, but the latest book that has come out is the 10 Steps to Getting and Staying Married, an Islamic Perspective. And as I say to people always, it's my husband's book, but I am in every page of this book because it's a lot of our practical experiences. So the book itself is theoretical, partially, and then the other part is lots of exercises that people can do before they get married and during the relationship. And that's essentially what we do. So I guess we will be just writing books, for the rest of our lives, hopefully. So both of us love writing. My second book and my third book is in the process of publishing. It's a historic fiction, but it's all to do with Muslim legacy in Moorish Andalusia. So I'm writing a series of books about the Moorish legacy, which I'm fascinated by.
Sounds really, really interesting. Jazakallah khair, Sister Henrietta, for sharing your story and telling us and the listeners about the amazing work that both you and your husband do. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put so much barakah in it for you, because I think it is very much needed within our community. And inshallah, I hope to pick up a couple of copies for myself, which brings us nicely to the main topic of today's podcast: marriage, to do or not to do.
Yes. Well, I guess we had to speak about it at some point. This is probably the topic that I get asked about most frequently by people who've just converted. It's probably the topic that I rant about the most on social media. It's often the case that new Muslims are strongly encouraged, or should you say strong-armed into, bulldozed into marriage very early on after taking Shahada. And I mean, I know from my own personal experience, that was the case with me. There was huge pressure to marry very shortly after I'd taken Shahada. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And so with Aisha and I thought that this would be, since this is a podcast by converts for converts, this would be a good topic to discuss in order to shed some light and maybe guidance on the matter as well.
Yes, I totally agree with you, because I also experienced it myself. The minute I mentioned I'm single in Egypt, that's the first question they ask you: are you single? And the second is, okay, I've got someone for you. Are you interested? But sometimes they don't even ask if you're interested. They just say, well, I know somebody, you must meet somebody because this is what you have to do. This is part of your faith. This is half of your faith. And then, we had this running joke in Egypt with my friend all the time, because if you have marriage is half of your faith and cleanliness is half of your faith, then you are complete. If you are married and clean, you are fine. So I think, so here's what I know from experience and from my own personal story. I think marriage is too complex of an issue for us to just jump into it just because other people are telling us to do. Marriage is hard without a religion, without cultural differences, without background, without anything else. Marriage is complex anyway, but we have to take into consideration when it comes to converts, whether we are marrying into our own culture, there will be issues around that culture, or even more challenging is when you're marrying into another culture, which is a completely different outlet. And I know it's very exotic, and I know this for myself. I loved the idea of getting married into a big Bengali family with 6 brothers and sisters, when I have one brother who I see probably once a year. So this is the kind of differences, but the practicalities are much different, and I think people don't really understand it at the beginning. I support a lot of convert groups, and I do talks, and I do events. And there is one particular group where the number of marriages have just soared through the roof, so quickly and so fast and so almost mindlessly. People got married. And I say to people, don't marry early, because you will spend at least a decade trying to unpack and unpick what that marriage has done to you. Because for converts, there is something very important. One is to understand our own faith, and that takes time. Just because we are Muslims, after a week or two, we don't know what our faith is. We have to live it, and we have to experience it ourselves. I know this because when I came to this country, 20 years ago, we had a little group of all Hungarian converts. And we were about 12 of us, and all 12 of us were married to a different nationality. And when we got together, our version of Islam was 12 different versions of Islam. Everyone was talking about what they learned from the husbands. One Sudanese, and there was a Palestinian, and there was a Pakistani, and my husband is Bengali. So that element of knowing your faith and knowing yourself in that faith is incredibly important. And you have to be very strong and solid before you embark on this relationship with somebody else who comes from a completely different background, completely different understanding. It's very complicated. But I think it's better to wait. And we can talk about this. I don't believe that there's a right person and the wrong person, but I think it's better to wait for the most appropriate person to marry than spending years and years of unpicking and unpacking yourself. Because if you marry mindlessly, I call it in a state of rafla, if you're not mindful of who you are, what's your faith, you will not be able to handle someone else's issues and family and background and education, or lack of it. So it's one of those things that it's a noble thing, and this is what we aspire to. But of course, it has to be done consciously, and it has to be done with an element of deep mindfulness. That would be my thought on this.
I think, mashallah, that's some excellent advice, especially the part about that the new convert needs to know herself or himself within the Islamic existence prior to bringing another person into that. And this is something I say quite a lot as well. But now let's say that somebody has decided that they're ready for that. What would you, Henrietta, advise are things that people should look for? And do you think it's necessary for especially sisters, but brothers as well, maybe, to have somebody working with them on their behalf, such as a wali or a wakil, somebody advocating for them when looking for a spouse?
Okay, so let's separate the two. So when it comes to what to look for, I always say to people, what are the signs that we know that it's not right? So what not to expect, what not to look for. And I think there are a couple of things which are really important. So number one is if you are looking for someone to complete you, that's the wrong direction, because nobody can complete you. Nobody, with the best intention in the world, nobody can give you everything that you want. Nobody can give you all your dreams. And I think if you need to look at it in a context, in a modern context, it's a huge imposition on someone to be someone's best friend, counselor, financial protector, support, childminder. It's a huge imposition. So we have to really start separating. Is that, how do I know? First of all, how do I know I'm ready? I'm ready for a relationship where I'm comfortable in my skin, and I'm willing to be open and be vulnerable about myself, because nothing is going to stretch you as much as marriage. Nothing is going to test your patience, your tolerance, your, the skills that are so divine, nothing is going to challenge that as much as a marriage does. So we have to have some baseline of readiness. If the person that you think might be suitable for you, you have to look at whether that person has friends, you can get references, how he treats his family. These are really practical things. But what I love about Islam as a religion, it's a very practical religion. It's not this airy-fairy, everything goes. It's a contract that we are entering, and we have to approach it as a contract. So if you don't have a reference, if you can't have reference because the person doesn't have any friends, you really need to start thinking about, can I live with a person like that? Or is it the kind of life I want? Is it my nature? Is it how I'm able to build a family? Is that he doesn't have any friends? If someone is secretive, and I say this to converts all the time, if someone is secretive, doesn't want to introduce you to anybody, doesn't want to ask you, you have a wali, you have a mahram, that secrecy, lack of transparency is a huge deal in the community. I know many, many sisters who got married only to find out that they were second wives and the marriage was never serious. The intention was never serious. It lasted probably a couple of months, and they are scarred for life and left with no financial support, no legal representation. These are very serious issues. So we really have to be very careful about this. And yes, I think if there is no mahram available, which is a case for a lot of non-Muslim, a lot of converts. Yes, a wali is an advisable thing to do, because I had my own when I arrived. I didn't have my father here. Even if he had been here in this country, my father was a non-Muslim, so he would have just told me, don't marry someone. He actually told me, don't marry someone from Bangladesh, because you're going to end up being sold for a goat. And and I said to my father, this is a very generous assumption of you, that this is the kind of man I would be marrying. But I actually had a senior Egyptian gentleman who was recommended to me when I was traveling from Egypt to London. And he did a fabulous job. He was very polite. He actually approached me with the proposal. He said, look, there is this young man here who might be interested in you. Are you interested in the first place? So we started having conversations. He was finding out what I wanted. And I was completely free and able to express what I liked and what I didn't like. So I think it's very important but of course we know that the wali has to be an adult. It has to be sane, a person who is with sanity, responsible and trustworthy. So character is so important. If you do choose a wali, and I recommend that you do, it has to be a responsible and trustworthy person, and the character of that person is going to help you more than any other help you can get, because that person will be able to identify if there are any holes in the story. Because you remember, people tell stories and everyone looks amazing on paper, and then you actually start sitting down with the practicalities, it's a very different story. So I think it's an advisable thing to do. Particularly, I think, and I don't mean, I have some very strong feminist views about Muslim sisters, but I think for sisters it's a very important issue, because we have a lot of cases with Barefoot where people call us and say, well, I got married, these were the conditions, there was no legal protection, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to turn, I've got 3 children, I can't feed them. So these, again, when you're mindful and considerate of how you get into a relationship, that's the start of a successful marriage. Whereas if there's secrecy, lack of transparency, there are holes in the story, you can't quite put it together, there is rush, there is a push, there is forceful nature of being married. I know a lot of sisters who are literally being forced into marry a particular person, and later on it turns out that person is a friend of the imam. He is 3 times divorced, and he had relationship issues before, but the imam always forgot to tell the sister that this person has some emotional issues, lack of emotional intelligence. These things we can start detecting quite early. So we don't have to go into the story a lot, but we can start seeing if someone is emotionally able to actually be with us on this journey.
I think, it's really important that we go maybe a little bit more in depth into these red flags that you're mentioning. And I would like you to explain to our listeners what a red flag actually is, because even though we've just touched upon those points and they're extremely valid points, a lot of sisters Muslim or new Muslim, often go into marriages not even knowing what on earth they should be looking for, what even a red flag is. They often compromise too much, or they have this very, this kind of strong naivety, thinking that they're going to change their husband or something, or that, do you know what I'm trying to say? So I think it's really important that we touch upon what red flags are exactly, and if you see them, what to do about it, rather than just go, oh, actually, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. Because as you mentioned earlier as well, to be honest, even if he has friends or he's in the mosque 5 times a day, they see one facade, they see one side of that person. So therefore, the potential spouse is only going to show one side to the imam, one side to their friends. Nobody really, what about the people that he's lived with? And even sometimes if he is good to his family, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be good to his spouse, which I can vouch for myself, unfortunately. So if we could just touch upon red flags more and explain, especially to sisters who have never really had any kind of relationship, or what they should, or any idea of even kind of, I don't really want to use the word domestic violence, but if we can go into that kind of area slightly, not entirely, because we want to empower sisters here, inshallah, that would be amazing, inshallah ta'ala.
Yeah. So, yes. So my husband laughs at me all the time, but I strongly believe that your intuition is one of the strongest things when it comes to consideration and deciding on a marriage. So your intuition, just remember, from a neuroscientific perspective, our intuition is that little voice that I believe a lot of converts, a lot of people, when everything is so new and then there's suddenly this looming opportunity to get married, I think that intuition starts going away from us because we don't trust it. But there is that tiny whisper inside of us which says, just be careful, or clarify this, or something doesn't quite feel right. It looks great, it looks right, but it doesn't feel right. So intuition actually is one of my favorite subjects in neuroscience, because intuition is, in essence, is a part of our brain inside, just under the prefrontal cortex, our amygdala. It's our fear center. So this is what gets triggered when we feel a sense of fear coming. And that is because we already experienced that fear before. So something is telling us something is not safe. And when you are embarking on a relationship, some people illuminate the space with peace, and other people come with baggages. Now, we all have baggage. That's a start. But there are certain things that we can do and we should do. So I would recommend that number one is, of course, after full referencing, after looking, having the chat with the closest people possible, about the person that you are intending to get to know. This is not about going out and dating. This is about you're wanting to get to know a little bit more about the person, because there's an etiquette in Islam about how to get to know somebody. There's a way to do it. So after all the referencing is done, after you have checked that the person is responsible, accountable, can look after himself, I'm talking about has a job, and it doesn't matter what kind of job it is, but knows how to feed himself. I know I'm talking very basic, but it is what it is. There are a lot of people who say that I live with my mom, and then I am looking for opportunities, but never actually managing to put food on the table or looking after themselves. I'm just talking about himself or herself. So there's a level of independence, responsibility, transparency, and accountability. And that's a baseline. And as a second level, you start thinking and looking at, how is that person emotionally mature? What is the emotional intelligence of that person? And for that, we have to do a lot of work ourselves. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, because it's very easy to judge somebody, oh, you don't know how to do this, but it's understanding our own emotional intelligence and applying it to read people at a deeper level. Don't just listen to words. Look at people's actions. Look at the way they speak to other people. Look at how they communicate with others. It's that capacity of how to manage complicated situations. Because again, when you get married, you will have stress, financial worries, you will have children, you will have postpartum depression, you will have all sorts. You will have death in the family, and you have signs before you get married. You will see signs of how people manage this in their own life. So that would be my second step, that emotional intelligence in ourselves. What are the things that I need to learn? And I know this very well because I was an incredibly impatient person. I still am. I think my husband still calls me impatient, but I'm getting better with the day because I have to learn how to apply the principles that I believe in, wholeheartedly believe in, but doing it is different. We had to learn these things, and I think that's one of the reasons why I love marriage so much, is because it can be the best way to learn about yourself or the worst way. You can bring the best out of each other, or you can bring the worst out of each other. And that's the mystery and the fascinating thing about marriage. And number 3, what I always say to people is that deeply, deeply listen to your intuition. When you pray from that essence and the space where you know that Allah is going to give you the right person, and you have the best expectations of God. Because I remember when I was terrified, to be honest. I was terrified when my husband proposed to me, and I said to him, look, I really can't marry you. You are loud, you are everything I don't want. Because he used to shout he used to do the khutbahs in Good Street where I used to work. And I said, no, this is not something I can ever manage. And then we sat down, we started talking, and he was a different person. And he said to me, you don't understand one thing. I might be loud, but that's passion. I'm not arrogant. I'm not physical. I'm not. And it is so true. He is a very soft, very gentle character inside. But I couldn't trust that intuition until I prayed. And I had to trust that actually I can see that he is not the typical loud person. Passion comes out in one way, but inside, and always, intuition is always allows you to look within the person's soul. And I think that's why it's so exciting, because when you are getting onto the train of marriage, you actually really start looking into the soul of somebody else. But for that, you have to be very comfortable looking into your own soul, because otherwise it's not going to work. So I hope it's helpful, because it's levels of knowing, but not just your partner, but knowing yourself. Because essentially, when you know yourself, then you can ask for what you need, you can ask for what you want, and you can create a working partnership. I've gone a little bit long on this one. But.
No, mashallah. I think you've brought in some really critical, crucial points, especially the part about knowing yourself and improving on your own emotional intelligence and your own intuition before even embarking on looking for a spouse. Really, these are things that we need to have in place. And also trusting that gut instinct when you're looking. But before all of that, or more important to all of that, is praying. We can't emphasize this strong enough. The thing about praying istikhara, asking Allah's guidance on things, people tend to think that this is only something we do when we're getting married or looking for a new job, and it's not. It should be part of our daily lives. Every single major or even minor decision we make, these are things that we should seek Allah's guidance on, but especially marriage, because this is somebody we're going to, inshallah, spend the rest of our lives with. And this is going to be the other parent to our children and so on. And I think that people don't appreciate the weight of it enough. And I think, too, another thing that gets misunderstood as well, and I mean, it does happen. There are so many of us who pray istikhara, and Allah makes that easy for us. And so we think, okay, this is the answer to our istikhara, which it is, that yes, we're going to go ahead, we're going to marry this person. And yet the marriage doesn't work out. And what we need to understand is that doesn't mean that Allah didn't accept your istikhara. It means that Allah chose that test for you for whatever reason. And you may or may not ever figure that reason out until the day of judgment, but there is a reason for it. So even, if you end up in a marriage that doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that your istikhara wasn't accepted. We should never think that way either. So Jazakallah khair for bringing up that point. And we've touched on so many points. And I think one thing that I hear a lot amongst the convert community, as it were, is this difficulty of how do we know that somebody is right for us when we come from a culture that expects you to date for a while, to have a relationship, to even, subhanAllah, at times live with a person and have kids with a person before you commit to marrying them, subhanAllah. We come from that cultural expectation, and we are now in a religious community that, of course, that's forbidden, that you can only know somebody so much before you actually commit to marrying them. So Henrietta, in your advice, your words, how do you know when it's right to accept a proposal?
So I'm going to say something that might surprise you, but maybe not so much. I actually think every human being is compatible with another human being. So the baseline is that if you are clear about what you want, and if you are comfortable with yourself, if you know who you are, if you are in alignment with your divine self that God has given you, anybody that comes along for a reason. So in that sense, anybody can be compatible with anyone. And I can vouch for this 100%. If you put myself and my husband together, there are no two people who were more different than the way we are. I think what happened to us in this culture, in this world, is that we are bombarded with the idea that it's that one person that you are looking, and he has to be perfect. I never allowed my children to watch those Disney movies, and, the prince is going to come, and, it doesn't work like that. My husband and I, if I want something white and he wants to have something black, we will have to settle for gray or blue or red or whatever, but we will settle, because anyone and everyone can be compatible with a bit of work and a really good dose of good intention and willingness to open up. My husband changed my outlook about the world in so many ways that I could have never imagined. I was never ready for. And I think this is really one of the beauties of intercultural marriages. And I changed his views on many, many fronts that he would have never, entertained. But because we are building a life together, and I think that's what people miss, we are not in a marriage to fulfill our baseline perfection, because perfection doesn't exist. Perfection only exists in God. And if you are continuously on the seeking of perfection, I have bad news for you. You will never find it, because you cannot find it. We are not perfect. Why are we continuously going on about the perfect person? It doesn't exist. So working with not being okay by being imperfect and open enough to work to build a life together, I think these are the key ingredients for a good marriage. And for that, it doesn't have to be a particular group, a particular background. It could be anyone. Because at the baseline, the Quran beautifully cuts it into pieces. It says, at the essence, we are all the same people, all human beings. Whether I marry someone from Timbuktu or I marry someone from Nigeria, doesn't matter. In my essence, as a human being, and if I can work on being that human being, it doesn't matter what culture I have. The culture actually is just the outer garment for it. But in essence, we are all the same. And this is why I think a lot of people, we need to take into consideration, what did you learn about relationship? What did you learn about marriage? In your childhood, what did you see? What did you pick up? Because if you are watching Bollywood, if you're watching Hollywood, Disney movies, you will have a warped idea of what marriage is. It will take away the reality of relationship. The reality of a marriage can be quite grim sometimes. You give birth and you are depressed for 5 months. What do? Your parents die, your children are sick, they have debilitating illnesses. What do? It's always going back to our core humanity of who are we as human being in our essence. And in that essence, from that essence, you can also feel the essence of another person. You can feel the vulnerability, you can feel the openness, you can feel the connection. And I think those relationships are really strong. With couples, the work we do is we help them to actually strip away everything that they have learned from their culture and just go back to that essential self. This is a core element, because in that self, anyone who comes along is compatible with you.
I have to say, I agree with what you've said. We do hear a lot about don't marry from this culture, don't marry from that culture. This ethnicity does this, that country is very toxic, and so on and so forth. And the fact of the matter is, every culture has toxic elements, because we're human beings. The people who fear Allah, the people who are closest to Allah, are the ones who are going to be rising above that and being able to strip that away. And I think that's what we need to be looking for, is that, that awareness of Allah in our partners' lives and in our lives. Because if we're leading God-centric lives, we'll be able to tolerate our partner's proclivities and mistakes, and they'll be able to tolerate ours as well, subhanAllah. Aisha, I think you had a question, didn't you?
No, I just wanted to add to that, actually, because the thing is, I think it's slightly more complicated than what Sister Henrietta says, with all due respect. And alhamdulillah, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that point. But because I think, yes, while I agree with what you've said, and again with what Amanda said, it's not the world isn't like that. The ummah and the community is not like that. More often you will find people who, again, converts in particular, experience this, and more so the women, often the brothers. Let's not exclude that. We do know that our convert brothers do sometimes suffer. I don't believe it's to the extent that our convert sisters do. And what I mean by that is there's an awful lot of pressure put upon, in particular, convert sisters who are often expected to kind of lose their identity, lose their own culture, lose themselves, and adopt other cultural expectations. And I'm literally talking sometimes having to read other people's minds here because of the mother-in-law or whoever. And the spouse, the spouse has come along and he said, well, yeah, I'm not that cultural. I believe I'm more British or insert country here than my own culture or whatever. And in reality, it doesn't always work out like that. But I do think it is down to intentions. I do think it is down to what Amanda just said about fearing Allah. And, this is a reminder to myself as well, of course, before anybody else. But I think, unfortunately, we're not seeing that happen. And this is why, and again, a lot of marriages are in trouble. A lot of marriages, a lot of couples are seeking counseling. And that's even if both want to seek counseling, because often that's not even the case. And a lot of, and it's also why a lot of these interracial marriages, and I'm not suggesting don't do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just making a point here that's why they often don't work, because there isn't that compromise. It's usually very one-sided, and often it's the heritage Muslim, as we call them, who tends to be more overpowering the new Muslim. That's what I find in my experience. And anyway, inshallah, subhanallah. However, we're going to move on to a more positive point now. I'd like to talk about how the Quran mentions that we are actually garments for one another, a libas for one another. And I was wondering if Sister Henrietta could maybe share some pointers on how we can implement this in our marriages and avoid what we've just discussed and touched upon, inshallah, to have healthy marriages, inshallah ta'ala. So Henrietta, what would you advise us, myself listening, and all our listeners as well, inshallah?
So the Quran in Surah 2, Ayah 187, specifies this very beautiful verse. They are as a garment for you, and you are as a garment for them. So this is one of the verses that is most often used about relationship. But what does this garment mean, and how do we use it? How do we apply it into practical terms? Whatever garment you want to go and buy, anytime you want to go out and buy something for yourself, you will never find a perfect garment, because there is always something that you don't like. It's maybe the shade or a part of pattern. There's no perfect garment. One of them will be longer than you expect. The other one will be shorter. You need to extend it, or it's too tight, or it's too loose, or too, you will find something with it. I don't think in the history of shopping, we will ever find anyone to come home and say, this is the perfect garment, because it doesn't exist. So just like this, this is the first reminder from this ayah for us, is that there is no perfect person on the face of this earth. Everybody comes with the imperfections, and the more comfortable we are with imperfections, the more chances we have to actually build a proper relationship. What is garment for? So garment is, first of all, to cover our body physically. If you think of covering the body, is a protection from the outside. Garment is the layer between the outside world, the difficulties, the harsh weather, the temperature, whatever it is. It's a protection from the outside, but it's also a protection of covering our shame, our bodies, our sense of who we are. Now, if you think of relationship that way, and I know a lot of marriages, unfortunately, they work the opposite way. They don't use marriage as a protection. They use it as a way to attack. And they expose themselves, they expose the other, they throw away the truths, they throw away vulnerabilities. It's quite a complicated, but it's a sacred It must be a sacred thing, because certain things shouldn't be going out of your relationship. So it's protection in that sense, but it's also protection for both individuals are protected, because the marriage is keeping you away from the things which are haram. It's keeping you away from the things that take you down the wrong lane. It's in a lot of ways, it's a protection. It's also a way to hide our imperfection. And that's another element that I find very strange when people say, I want to go for counseling because my husband needs it. You see, the issue here isn't the husband or who needs it. It's you need it and your relationship needs it. So it's not about who wants to go for counseling or who doesn't. To be honest, nobody wants to go to counseling because we have this stigma around it. We think it's a horrible thing to have. We have something is broken in me. I have to fix myself. I am wrong. And it's easier to say, we need counseling because my wife needs it. It's actually, when I hear this, I always know that it's actually both of you who needs it, and the relationship needs it more than anything else. So we have to be real about this. It's also guarding and beautifying at the same time. So while we are protected, we also look much better with good clothes on. So it's something that gives us a sense of pride. It gives us a sense of beautification of our soul. And again, I have no judgment about sisters or brothers who decide, or they can't find somebody, or decide not to get married, because there are a huge number of people like that. This is not about that. But I find that marriage is, because it's so testing and because it's so hard, it actually beautifies the character. Because to say that you live together for 20 odd years, that has to be a statement of beauty. However difficult those years were, it is in itself, is Allah's mercy and rahmah that you've managed to lead a life for that long together. So we have to become a community who becomes more, I guess, prouder that when we have good marriages. I don't know about you, but I get really, really surprised that we don't celebrate good marriages. Why is it that our community doesn't celebrate when we see good, functioning, powerful, really good marriages? Why don't we celebrate marriage? We are suffering before we get married because everybody wants to get married. And then when we are suffering when it's divorce and difficulties, but we never celebrate. Where is the celebration of our community? To actually take lessons from each other. There are so many wonderful couples who give amazing examples to others, and it should be, I guess, sharing this as a way of knowing each other, and as a way of knowledge is to share what a good marriage could look like, and what people do in real terms that a good marriage actually is. Again, so clothes are never perfect, and we also have the right to choose which type of fashion or clothes we wear. I'm just reading it from my husband's book because he has written it up, so it's easier for me to look at this. But we actually have the right to choose what kind of clothes I want to wear. And just think about it this way: when you become a Muslim, whichever community you become a Muslim with, they will tell you to wear their clothing. If you became a Muslim with Bengalis, they will tell you wear shirwa kameez, or the Pakistanis. If you are an Arab, they will give you clothes. I remember myself that I was forced to wear Egyptian clothing. And when my friend looked at me, she's a very fashionable, Italian fashion designer style of Egyptian woman with a slim body. And she looked at me, she said, "What are you wearing?" And I said, "Well, I thought this is what I have to wear because I'm in Egypt and I have to look like an Egyptian." She said, "No, but it's the same with marriage. You choose, you have a choice of what kind of culture you want to get married to. And if you feel strongly about a particular culture, you say, well, I actually can't imagine myself living with in-laws, for example, or I can't imagine being asked, cooking for 10 people in my family every single day." And look, I have this experience. I lived with my in-laws for 2 years. And I tell you, as a European, as a kind of semi-feminist, or whatever people call me sometimes, I know that the challenges were only visible to me after I got married. I didn't know these things. And a lot of the times when we make decisions, we make it with the best intention, but in practical terms, we don't actually know what it means. You can visit the family, you can see roughly what's going on, but every single day, the daily life, you don't know until you actually go into it. Now, what people do, and what I think people kind of get it sometimes wrong, And I did it wrong at the beginning. I wear the whole shiwa kameez. I was eating with my hand. I picked up Bengali, all because of my intention. And I love this because I can speak to my mother-in-law in Bengali. But could I be looking after a family of 10? No, I'm sorry, that's not my culture. I can't do it. And a lot of the times women know this, that they can't do it, but they keep doing it for whatever reason or the other. So yes, it is a tension, it is a conflict, but what are you going to do about it? Because what happens often is that people keep doing it for a very, very long time until they reach a breaking point, and that's the end of the relationship. So if we choose, just like we can choose the garment, we can choose a particular style, we can choose the fitting, we can choose as much as we are comfortable, and we can before we get married. And then if something doesn't work, just like if a piece of clothing doesn't work, we have to alter it. We have to maybe loosen it, we have to maybe tighten it a little bit. Maybe the shoulder is falling off, I need to put it up, maybe I need to pin it somewhere. So this is, for me, it really is a beautiful example, is that we alter the clothes because we change when we buy a piece of clothing. I bought a dress 5 years ago. I've changed. My body changed since I bought it. I look different now than I looked 5 years ago. So I have to probably alter it or decide, actually, this is too tight. I can't wear it anymore. Now I have to look at what can I do with that piece of clothing. And with marriage, we can't throw it out. It's not like I'm done with my partner and it's finished. But the consciousness of how am I wearing that garment. And for me, the idea of the garment is just so rich, and we can talk about it for so long, but the idea of garment, the first and foremost for me, is about protection. It's about protection for the soul, protection for my privacy, protection for my identity, for my integrity, for who I am as a person. But for that, I need to step into that integrity. I need to stand up for the truths that I believe within the Islamic context that makes the relationship work. We have a lot of arguments with my husband about sometimes basic things. Imagine our children with a Bengali father, with a Hungarian mother. The kids are confused. So what do we do with the culture? What is our cultural celebration? What language do we speak apart from English? What particular culture they are more drawn to? These are all matters of working out what food we eat. It was a constant debate. What kind of food are we going to eat? I can't eat Bengali food every day, but he can't eat Hungarian food because it's too dry and bland and plain for him. So what do we eat? Very basic. But the bigger things, what do we think of education? Which school do we send our children to? How are we going to educate them about Islam? Are they going to madrasa, or are they going to, what do we do? So you can look at this, and you can, just like layering clothes, you can look at the layers of a relationship, and then you really are on the way of creating a partnership. Otherwise, it's a one-way system, and one culture will win at the end.
MashaAllah, I love the way that you've brought the different ideas of what clothing, libas, actually is, what garments actually are, and how that relates to marriage. I think that's very thought-provoking. And I did want to actually address what Aisha said earlier about, there are a lot of couples out there who are suffering in toxic marriages, and in sometimes, Allah forbid, but sometimes there are abusive marriages and so on. And I think what Henrietta, Jazakallah khair for this, what you've outlined today is a very good framework for new Muslims to work within in order to avoid getting into such partnerships, inshallah. And I mean, obviously, whatever is written for us by Allah, but we need to, as you said, know ourselves, have our own emotional maturity, have our own emotional intelligence, understand who we are, understand who Allah is, and trust in Him and rely on Him. We covered the red flags, we covered, the good things to look for. And then you've beautifully encompassed the whole thing with in what way is your spouse a garment? And of course, that works both ways. Our husbands are garments for us, and we are garments for them. So everything that Henrietta was just saying is also things that we will be for that person, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair for that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I have learned so much from listening to you. Once again, the title of your books, just for our listeners, and where can they be purchased from?
So my husband's book is called 10 Steps to Getting and Staying Married, an Islamic Perspective.
Okay, and your husband's name is
Ajmal Masroor.
Okay.
Yeah, so Ajmal Masroor. And my book is called Heartsmart, One Woman's Journey from Her Head to Her Heart. And both of these books are available on our website, which is www.barefootinstitute.com, one word, lowercase, barefootinstitute.com.
Okay.
And there is a resources and a bookstore section on the website. And then we usually send that once a week. So as orders come in, we post that once a week.
Brilliant. Excellent resources there. Jazakallah khair for that. I know that you've made so many incredible points, and I hope that this has been an empowering listen for our audience, with a lot of points that they can take home and put into practice, inshallah.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for everything that you've said today. I agree with Amanda. It's been really informative. I think, inshallah, it will give new Muslims, male and female, food for thought before they even think about getting married, because clearly it's not that simple as just, finding someone and trotting off into the sunset. So this is no Greece moment here. But no, Jazakallah khairan. And I just wanted to make dua that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all to be the best spouses we can be, to have the best spouses we can possibly have, and to put love and mercy between our hearts for those who are married. Inshallah. Ameen. And Amanda, over to you again.
Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Jazakallah khair, Henrietta, for coming on. Did you have any last thoughts to conclude with?
Yes, I was thinking that, we have left at a very, very important, I left at a very important point about mercy and love and mercy, because this is really what relationship is about. So when marriage is mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned as a mawadda and a rahma, which is love and mercy together. And, we have this really funny thing with my kids, because my kids often go with my husband for conducting nikahs when it was allowed before COVID. And they attended a lot of weddings, and they actually know the actual ceremony inside out, which has a joke in it, which my husband says, if it wasn't for the mercy of my wife, we wouldn't be married. Because he always talks about how marriage isn't just about love, it's about mercy. And mercy is an amazing, it's an amazing concept in itself. It's the same word as the womb. It's the same word as looking after, unconditional forgiveness. And, so many elements are encompassing in that. But I think what we do as human beings is that we focus on the love. And if we don't get the love, and if we can't give the love, and it's all to do with love, we don't focus on the mercy. And it has to be 50-50 at least. It has to be in balance. We have to look again. We have to look at ourselves and say, if I am not getting the love that I want, or I'm not loved in a way that I want to be loved, am I giving the love to the other person? Because you see, what we get is what we give. And it takes courage, and it takes an immense amount of humility to accept that I may be not as loving as I think I am, but I'm expecting other people to love me. And of course, in therapy, we discover it's because we are seeking that love that we never got as children. So it's a really important element that we focus on the love, but at the same time, how can I bring more mercy? How can I bring more understanding, forgiveness when there is a conflict in the marriage? Because, or friendships, or even with colleagues, it's something to do with not just wanting something, but being able to give it. And I believe that when we give it first, that it's quite natural that it's going to come back to us. When we are able to be vulnerable, we are helping someone else to open up and be vulnerable. And for those couples who are struggling, you see, the issue here is that when you are focusing on trying to fix the love, you are only seeing the relationship as a one-way system. When you look at it from love and mercy perspective, you really start chiseling each other out. You really become a couple, because then you will see how vulnerable, which is why we always recommend for people that there are some issues that you have to work on yourself, and that's an individual work you need to do, but there are issues which is to do with the relationship. And for that, you need to see each other battling the issue. And you have to see, it's no secret that my husband and I, we were in therapy for a couple of years, because we have come to a point where we couldn't fix our relationship. And there's no shame in admitting that. I don't believe that there is a shame in saying I was wanting the love that I couldn't give, and I was demanding the love that he couldn't give. And we understood that because we were not merciful the way we were doing it, we were very harsh with each other. So it's about the two working together, that love shouldn't exist without mercy, and mercy doesn't exist without love either.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing what Henrietta's just said, reiterating the point that marriage isn't just about what's in it for me. It's about the other person as well. And it all comes back around again to intentions. It's like a full circle. It's to do with your intentions. What are you going into this marriage for? Are you going to be, you're responsible for another person as well as yourself. How are you going to interact with them? How you can show compassion and mercy toward the other person, that inshallah ta'ala will be reciprocated. So I think that's a really, really important point, because again, often you may see that it tends to be very much, yes, a contract, but a contract where it's almost business-like, and it's almost a case, where it's, well, my rights. Well, what about the other person's rights? What about how you treat the other person, how you treat your children? Because we're also taught, again, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the best of spouses, and he showed compassion, he showed mercy, he made shura with his wives, he helped around the house, and he did things for himself. He didn't just take, he gave. And obviously he was the best of human beings anyway, but he did give, he gave, and yes, they gave too. So it's a two-way street. And again, that's a reminder for myself as well as everybody else listening. But Jazakallah khair, Henrietta. This is the end of our podcast for today. I just want to thank you for coming on.
Jazakallah khair for coming on, Henrietta. And may Allah put barakah in your work and continue to give you success with that. And if anybody has any questions that they would like us to pass on to Henrietta, you can get in touch with us via email at unplugged@beginnings.org.uk, or any questions at all for myself or Aisha as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure, and I wish you and your listeners a wonderful reflection always. I use the analogy of Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, is that when we point the finger, three fingers are pointing back at us. So let's use all of your podcasts for reflection, for deep learning, and hopefully we'll see each other soon in person.
Thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback. So if you have any comments, questions, or requests for topics of discussion, please feel free to drop us an email on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk, and be sure to hit the subscribe button. So for now, this is Aisha.
And this is Amanda.
And this has been Converts Unplugged.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.